The mansion stood at the edge of the city, towering over the landscape like a king among peasants. Its tall black gates were imposing, its walls high and impenetrable, hiding the riches within. Inside, the marble floors gleamed, the crystal chandeliers cast golden light, and the air smelled of wealth. But the house was silent. 9-year-old Chidi Obidike sat alone in the massive living room, staring at the door. He was waiting for his father. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed loudly 8 times. Chidi sighed. He had waited every night for weeks, but his father never came home early. Thunder rumbled outside. Rain tapped against the windows like impatient fingers. He wrapped his small arms around himself, hugging the toy car his father had given him on his last birthday. It was an expensive car, painted gold and black. His father always sent him gifts, but he never sent himself. The door to the kitchen creaked open, and Mama Chinua, the housemaid, stepped in, her wrapper tied tightly around her waist. She was a short, plump woman with warm eyes that had seen too much. She sighed as she walked toward him. "Small ogre," she said, sitting beside him. "You should go to bed. Your father will come home late." Chidi turned to her, his small voice firm. "Will he come at all?" Mama Chinua hesitated. She had no answer. Instead, she pulled him close and whispered, "Your father loves you in his own way." Chidi wanted to believe her. But as the rain poured harder, he felt the emptiness stretch inside him. He was 9 years old, and he had everything except the one thing he truly wanted. The sun burned hot over the schoolyard, where fathers and sons laughed together. It was Father-Son Day at Royal Oak Academy, one of the most prestigious schools in Onitsha. The event had been announced weeks ago. Chidi had told his father about it. His father had promised. "I will be there," he had said, distracted, flipping through documents at his study table. But now, as Chidi sat on the school bench, watching fathers toss their sons in the air and play soccer, his father was nowhere to be seen. His chest tightened as he clenched his fist. Mr. Ode, his teacher, walked to him, smiling kindly. "Chidi, it's time for the speeches. Come, tell the school about your father." Chidi's throat went dry. He stood up slowly, walking toward the stage like a prisoner walking to his execution. He turned to face the crowd, his classmates, their fathers, the teachers. His heart pounded. They were waiting. He swallowed hard. "My father," he paused. The words choked him. He thought of the empty mansion. The unopened presents. The nights waiting by the door. Then, he forced a smile. "My father is in London. He is on business." The lie tasted bitter. The crowd clapped politely. But Chidi saw the truth in their eyes. They knew he was lying. That evening, he went home and waited. When the clock struck 10, something inside him snapped. He grabbed his toy car and threw it across the room, watching it shatter against the marble floor. For the first time, Chidi felt anger. The mansion was dark when Chief Obidike arrived home that night. His footsteps were slow but heavy as he entered the living room, tossing his jacket on the sofa. "Why are you still awake?" he asked without looking at his son. Chidi stood there, eyes burning with resentment. "You lied," he said. "You said you would come." Chief Obidike barely paused. He poured himself a glass of whiskey from the bar, taking a long sip before answering. "I was busy." "You are always busy." His father's jaw tightened. He turned to him, his voice calm but sharp. "I work for you, Chidi. To build your future." Chidi's hands curled into fists. "I don't want your future. I want my father." Chief Obidike's face hardened. He walked past his son toward the staircase. "Go to bed." And just like that, the conversation was over. Chidi realized then that his father was not a father. He was a stranger who lived in the same house. And strangers never cared. Something changed in Chidi after that night. At school, he stopped raising his hand in class. He stopped caring about homework. His teachers noticed, but they assumed he was just being a boy. Then, one day, he met Emeka. Emeka was nothing like the students at Royal Oak Academy. He was rough around the edges, a boy who knew the streets better than he knew books. His uniform was always rumpled, his smile always mischievous. "You look like you need some fun," Emeka had said, grinning. Chidi had hesitated at first. He was not like Emeka. He was a rich man's son. But then he thought of the empty house. The silent dinners. The father who never looked at him. So, that evening, he followed Emeka into the city streets. And the real rebellion began. Mama Chinya noticed the change. She saw the late nights. The missing school books. The cigarette smell on his clothes. One night, she sat beside him, her voice gentle but firm. "Small ogre, what are you doing to yourself?" Chidi did not answer. "You think your father does not care," she continued. "But throwing your life away will not make him see you." Chidi laughed bitterly. "What life?" Mama Chinya's heart broke. She had raised him like her own son. And now, she was watching him disappear into a world that would eat him alive. She knew she had to tell Chief Obidike. But she also knew he would not listen. Chief Obidike was a man who measured success in numbers, profit margins, land acquisitions, bank balances. But there was one number he never considered: the nights his son cried himself to sleep. When the school sent another report about Chidi's failing grades, he barely glanced at it. He sat in his study, drinking his whiskey, and waved a dismissive hand when Mama Chinya tried to talk. "Boys will be boys," he said. "He is not just being a boy," Mama Chinya insisted, her voice trembling. "He is lost." Chief Obidike frowned. "Then we will send him abroad. Let him study in London." The words made Chidi laugh. He was standing in the doorway, his uniform unbuttoned, his school tie loose like a noose around his neck. "You think London will fix me?" Chief Obidike turned to him, his brows creasing in irritation. "You are behaving like a spoiled child." Chidi shook his head. His father did not understand. He never would. "I am not your son," Chidi said bitterly. "I am your mistake." And with that, he walked out. For the first time, Chief Obidike felt a strange, unfamiliar emotion in his chest. Fear. Chidi sat under the bridge with Emeka, watching cars speed by. "Money is the only thing that talks," Emeka said, flipping through a wad of cash. "Your father is rich, but does he respect you?" Chidi exhaled. "No." "Then make your own money." Emeka slid an envelope across the table. Inside were documents, fake contracts for a business deal. A simple scam. "The old man we're dealing with is a fool," Emeka continued. "He will sign without checking. We take the money, we walk away." Chidi hesitated. This was different from skipping class. This was crime. But he thought about the mansion, the cold stairs, the way his father dismissed him like a fly. And then, he picked up the envelope. "Good boy," Emeka grinned. The deal was set. The meeting took place at a small hotel. The old businessman arrived, trusting, smiling. Chidi and Emeka laid out the fake contract, their voices smooth, their lies polished. "Just sign here, sir. It's a once-in-a-lifetime investment." The man hesitated. His wrinkled hands trembled over the paper. Then, suddenly, his face twisted in pain. His breathing became uneven. Chidi's heart stopped. "Sir." The old man clutched his chest. And then, before Chidi could do anything, he collapsed. The room filled with chaos. Emeka grabbed the money and ran. Chidi stood frozen, staring at the man's lifeless body. The sirens wailed in the distance. And Chidi knew he had crossed a line he could never undo. By morning, the police had arrested Emeka. Chidi had managed to escape, but his face was all over the news. At home, Chief Obidike was livid. "You have disgraced me," he roared. "My own son, the common thief." Chidi was silent. He had no defense. His father's voice turned cold, sharp like a blade. "You are no longer my son." The words struck harder than any slap. Chidi's body stiffened. So this was it. Just like that, he was arrested. He turned and walked toward the door. He did not look back. 3 weeks passed. Chidi was living in the streets. Then the news came. Chief Obidike was dead. A stroke. The empire he built, his businesses, his lands, his wealth, was now without a ruler. Chidi's mind went blank. He felt nothing. Not grief. Not relief. Just emptiness. His father had left without ever truly knowing him. And now, he never would. At the reading of the will, Elder Nwosu sat in Chief Obidike's grand office, flipping through the documents with satisfaction. The late chief made some adjustments before he passed, Elder Nwosu announced. Chidi's heart pounded. He had lost his father. Surely, he had not lost his inheritance too. Elder Nwosu cleared his throat. Your father has left everything to his business partners. You, Chidi, inherit nothing. Nothing. The word hit him like a truck. The empire his father built. The fortune meant for him. All of it was gone. No money. No home. Chidi slept in bus parks, ate from trash bins. His so-called friends had vanished. Even Emeka was gone, rotting in a police cell. For the first time, Chidi felt the true weight of loneliness. And it crushed him. One night, rain poured mercilessly over the city. Chidi sat beneath a broken shed, soaked and shivering. Then, he heard a familiar voice. Small ogre. He looked up. Mama Chinya. She was standing there, holding an umbrella. Tears filled her eyes. Come home, my son. Chidi wanted to argue. Wanted to say he had no home. But his voice cracked. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to be held. Mama Chinya took him to a small mechanic shop. You will walk, she said. You will build yourself again. And so Chidi began again. With grease-stained hands, with honest sweat, with quiet dignity. For the first time, he was not a rich man's son. He was just Chidi. And that was enough. The scent of burning oil and metal filled the air as Chidi walked under the hot sun. His hands, once soft and untouched by labor, were now rough, stained with grease and hard work. Days became weeks, and weeks became months. Slowly, he was learning. He was no longer a rich man's son. He was a man rebuilding himself. Then, one day, Ifeoma walked into the workshop. She was taller than he remembered, her brown skin glowing under the sun. Her confidence filled the space before she even spoke. Chidi, she asked, her eyes filled with disbelief. Chidi straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. He hadn't seen Ifeoma in years, not since they were children. She had always been the smart one, the one with dreams bigger than the city. Ifeoma, he said, his voice uncertain. She smiled, but there was something else in her eyes, pity. I heard about everything, she said gently. I didn't think I'd find you here. Chidi felt a surge of embarrassment. Once, he had been the prince of Onitsha, the son of Chief Obidike. Now, he was just a mechanic. But Ifeoma didn't seem to care. She leaned against the dusty counter, watching him. I run a business now, she said. A logistics company. I'm looking for reliable mechanics to maintain my delivery trucks. Do you want in? For the first time in a long time, Chidi saw a door opening. He took a deep breath. Maybe life was not over for him yet. Chidi worked harder than ever. He was no longer the boy who wanted his father's attention. He was a man creating his own path. With Ifeoma's help, he secured contracts to repair and service delivery trucks. The money wasn't much at first, but it was honest. One evening, after closing the shop, he and Ifeoma sat outside, watching the sky turn orange. You're different now, she said. Chidi exhaled. I had to be. She looked at him for a long moment before smiling. I think I like this version of you better. Chidi wasn't sure if he liked himself yet. But for the first time, he didn't hate the man he was becoming. One morning, while reading the newspaper, Chidi's hands froze over a headline. Elder Nwosu's business collapses, fraud investigation underway. He felt a chill run through him. Elder Nwosu, the man who had taken everything from him, was now facing ruin. That same evening, Elder Nwosu came to him. The old man's face was tired, his once proud shoulders slumped. He looked at Chidi, hesitation flickering in his eyes. Chidi, he began, voice quieter than usual. I need help. Chidi stared at him. For years, he had dreamed of seeing this man suffer. He had imagined this exact moment, the moment his enemy would fall at his feet. And yet, he didn't feel victorious. He only felt tired. What do you want? He asked. Elder Nwosu sighed. Alone. I just need time to recover. Chidi should have laughed. Should have turned his back. But something held him back. Something inside him whispered, do not become like them. Chidi didn't give Elder Nwosu a loan. Instead, he did something greater. He bought back his father's company. Not for revenge. Not for power. But because it was his legacy. With Ifeoma by his side, he restructured the business. He hired honest people. He made sure it became something his father never could have built, something built on integrity, not greed. Elder Nwosu watched from the sidelines, his once great empire slipping from his grasp. Chidi had taken back what was his. But he had done it without becoming his father. Years later, Chidi stood before his father's grave. The tombstone was simple, elegant, a sharp contrast to the man who had been larger than life. He had not visited since the funeral. Had not wanted to. But now, as he stood there, he found that he did not feel anger anymore. He knelt down, placing a single white flower on the grave. I understand now, he whispered. But I wish we had more time. The wind rustled through the trees. For the first time, Chidi felt peace. Chidi sat in his new office. The office that had once belonged to his father. A worker came in, holding a framed picture. Sir, should we hang up your father's portrait? Chidi turned his gaze toward the empty space on the wall. Then, slowly, he shook his head. No, he said. Instead, he handed the man a different portrait, the picture of Mama Chinya. The woman who had truly raised him. As the worker hung the portrait, Chidi smiled. He had lost his father. He had lost his inheritance. But he had found something greater. Himself.